Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to my talk today. Before I begin, I'd like to thank, well, first of all of you, the participants, for being here at NDC today, and also a big shout out to all of our organizers and sponsors who helped make today happen. So my talk for you today is .NET Everything. We are going to take a tour through the world of .NET, looking at how it can be your platform for building anything. From desktop to web to cloud, mobile, games, IoT, and AI, you can use .NET for everything. And we will look at all these different scenarios and how you can use your skills across everything with the shared tooling and shared platform that really make .NET special. But first, a little bit more about me. So my name is Melissa Houghton, and I am a lead software engineer and developer relations at Xenix. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies, and I work mostly with web application development focused on .NET, but recently, in the last few years, I've been very interested in how I can apply my .NET skills to all these other different scenarios. I've been looking into how I can get into mobile with MAUI and use .NET for IoT and all these other areas. And I've really loved how easy it has been to translate my skills across all the different scenarios. So that's why I decided to create this talk for all of you. A little bit more insights about me and a bit of a fun fact is that my husband and I are actually launching our own wine business. My husband's a trained winemaker, so he knows all the science behind winemaking and how it all works. But in my free time, on the weekends and stuff, I've been going into the winery and helping him with making the wine. And as a small business owner launching our business, we need technology to help us to really get started. And why not use .NET to help fuel our business? So I'll show you how I've applied, or could apply theoretically, using .NET to different ways to helping run a small wine business. So .NET, a little bit more about that, is a unified development platform. We talked about how you can integrate to cloud, so this is using Azure and all their different SDKs and the Azure services that are out there. For web, we can get into ASP.NET and Blazor. For desktop and mobile, using things like .NET MAUI. In mobile, you can also do some hybrid scenarios with desktop and Blazor hybrid, and Unity with gaming, IoT, AI, ML, all of that. There's a unified base class library that sits underneath everything with .NET 6. So there's a shared runtime and shared SDK across all these different types of scenarios. There's also a vast ecosystem of third-party tools, applications, and packages that we can use to really support and make really robust .NET applications. And a whole bunch of third-party and vendor libraries and components that we can use to increase what we're doing. And it's all open source and cross-platform. So things are free to go in and look at how things are actually written. You can contribute to all these different packages, make them better, or just do little improvements here and there, like we heard talked about at the after party last night. And there's some really powerful tooling as well that comes along with this ecosystem, with Visual Studio Code, or if you want to get outside the Microsoft space, you can even use tools like Writer and a bunch of other tools that support development with .NET. It's also a very performant framework as well. In the Tech Empowered Round 20, it outperformed all of the other popular development frameworks. So it has really high performance. There's also your choice of language between C#, F#, and VB. I'm a C# developer, so all of my examples will be in C#, but if you like the functional programming side of things, you can go that direction as well. And .NET 6 is one of the most popular frameworks. It's only became fully generally available in November last year, but there's already 5.6 million users out there. So it's a very popular framework that is loved by developers. And there is an amazing .NET community out there. I mentioned it's open source. There's also the .NET Foundation, which supports all of the community and all these different projects that help make .NET even better. There's endless free learning resources out there with tons of great tutorials and ways to help you get started. And people in the community are constantly contributing different videos and blog posts. I've done some learning training myself from Peter Gallagher sitting here, contributed into the community. And podcasts, Richard Campbell, our keynote, he has a really great .NET podcast called .NET Rocks. So tons of free stuff to help you learn, and alongside that open source community as well. So getting back to my wine business. The first thing that I wanted to help our business is just a simple website, a place where people could go and find out a bit more about us and maybe see what wines we had to sell and do the ordering through the website there as well. And I can do this all with .NET. And I decided to use Blazor. So Blazor is a .NET-based, full-featured front-end framework. And there's two different hosting models. You can have it on the server side, so that uses SignalR to send it to the client browser. Or you can actually have your .NET running in the browser on the client using WebAssembly. So that's the client-side rendering for Blazor. And it has a shared component model between the server and client browser, and it means that you can use those same tools and share things throughout your front and back end and have powerful .NET full-stack applications. And it's part of the ASP.NET Core family. So ASP.NET Core is an extension of .NET that's focused on web application development. It's really powerful in itself. If you've worked with building web applications in .NET, you've probably come across ASP.NET Core, and it's cross-platform and has very powerful for MVC, getting into your APIs as well, and microservices, and having these full-fledged applications. And you can have your applications on Windows, Linux, macOS, or in containers with Docker. So let's take a look at how we can get started using Blazor. So another thing with Blazor is there's all kinds of third-party component libraries out there for you to use. So it's similar to other front-end frameworks where people have created these component libraries that help with the design and the layout of your website, so you don't have to define all the individual HTML tags if you don't want to and the styling. You can use a component library that has already set that up for you. So in my project, I decided to use a component library called Blazor, which is an open source Blazor component library that's based on material design. So this is just the main header page that we saw the screenshot of. I could have used a regular HTML H1 tag here, but because I'm using the MUD component library, it's the MUD text is what it's called. But I also have a component here, a directive, that is pointing to this carousel component that I've defined separately. So you can split up your components, and these can be reusable through your application. So you can have them on different pages. So the carousel is just those images that are flowing across. But if I wanted that on multiple pages, I can define it once and then just reference it in my main page like this. You can also have logic within your Blazor applications. So Blazor, for defining everything, uses the Razor pages, but you can inject things like your HTTP client or the built-in navigation manager, which navigates between the different pages, and have things like your if statements and for each loops. So this is for the shop page, which will look at a list of products that I have in my shop. It'll show something default if it's nothing in there. Otherwise, it'll go through and show all the details for the different products that I might have. And you have your code block here where you can do your API calls and anything like that if you'd like. So I'll show you what that looks like. While that's building, I also have separated out my models into a separate library. So that's down here. I just have one model to begin with, but this means that when I do set up my API, I can have the shared model definition between both the front and back end with my full stack .NET applications. So this is what the website looks like. I didn't really write any special styling for it. It just has the using that component library. I have a basic menu here. I can go to that shop we're looking at. There's currently no products, so it just has the default coming soon. But let's add in an API to get our products from our backend. And we can do that using Azure Functions. So because it's just a couple of HTTP calls that I need in my website, I'm using Azure Functions, which are a serverless solution that support .NET and .NET 6, which are small pieces of code that you can execute based on different types of triggers. And it all has event-driven automated scaling. It's serverless, runs in the cloud. There's no infrastructure management, and has really good flexible pricing options for small business owners such as myself, which is really nice. And also, to make things simpler for hosting, I can use something called Azure Static Web Apps. So this is a solution that makes it really nice to automatically build and deploy your full stack applications directly from your repository. And with Blazor WASM, so Blazor WebAssembly in the client, we can use Azure Static Web Apps for our full stack .NET applications, because it is static content as it transpiles into JavaScript, but it has our .NET client in the front end, and then our Azure .NET functions in the back end, which is really nice. And it means that we can set it up with GitHub Actions, so it'll automatically build and deploy everything directly to our web app. So let's take a look at how we can do that. So I'm just going to check out a version where I have, stop debugging, where I've already set up the API for us. So I've already set up in the API. Using Azure Functions, I have 2 endpoints. I have also, so I've set up my data in a Azure SQL database as well. So I'm actually using Entity Framework with my Azure Functions to connect to the database and get my products out. And one thing I learned recently when I was looking at this is that you can actually do dependency injection with your Azure Functions. So you can use things like Entity Framework and all those advanced toolings that you would normally use with your .NET applications. And you can wire up your dependencies and your services just like this. And you set up your application context similar to how you would Entity Framework in other applications. So I have 2 endpoints. I have a post endpoint, which is just sending in the object details for any products that I want to add to my database. And then I have a get endpoint, which is pretty simple, where we just do accessing the database context to get the list of products. In a real production version, I would want more security and error handling happening on here. But for this demo, this is a good way to start. So I'll show you how we can actually begin by testing these out even just locally with our tools that we have. So you can set as the startup project, and then you can hit the endpoints directly from in here. So if I go if I go onto the web, I can see, so this is the SQL server that I've already set up my API to connect into. I have 2 products in there. We have a Yarra Valley 2022 Chardonnay, which is actually what we're making, and a 2023 Rosé, which is in the future and potentially something we'll be doing. So I have the API is now running, and I can see here it tells me about my 2 endpoints that I have and how I can access them as well. So if I just hit that get endpoint, it should return those 2 wines from our products list. It does take a little bit to warm up, as an Azure function has the cold start, but there we go. We have the Yarra Valley Chardonnay and then the Rosé as well. And say we wanted to add in maybe another variety. We can use, I have that post endpoint, and we can just do, maybe I posted the wrong thing. I did post the wrong thing. I was hoping I had it in my clipboard still. It's always fun knowing what's in your clipboard. We can just do a curl request to the post endpoint, or you could set up something with Postman or something. But because I have the Azure core tools installed, it means that I can access my Azure Functions and do all the advanced debugging and stuff. I could have put breakpoints within Visual Studio to see how everything works there. Cool, so now we have our 3 different wines, which is great. The next thing we want to do is we want to connect this up to our front end. So currently in our shop, we just have an empty list of products. So we want to go and hit that API endpoint and connect it all together. I've set up my front end to use that product data model that I showed in the class library. And I'm using the same one in my API here. So this is the same data product model. So they have, everything looks the same, which makes it nice. And what we can do is we can add in, you can see my secret demo notes. We can add in the HTTP call to our Razor page, and part of the component lifecycle, there's different steps in the component lifecycle, but it's recommended to add in your HTTP calls to the uninitialized async for any data that you want binded up and loaded before everything renders for the client to view. So we just have a simple get call from here, and we're calling API/products and deserializing the product details that will then come up on our page. And in order to debug this locally, I want to run both my client and the API at the same time. So we can set both of them as our startup projects. And we can start both of them with debugging if you want. So you could debug both the front and the back end at the same time, which is really nice. Or just one if you're already confident with one side and then want to go to the other. So when we run this, it'll open up our website again. And then we should be able to go to the shop page and see all of our 3 wines come back from our database through our Azure function all the way back to the front end. And again, it's a cold start, so it does take a little bit to load. But there we go. We have our 3 different wines that we can then do things like add to cart and then check out. I haven't actually built the checkout functionality yet, but this is an example of what it could look like. Cool, so that's how we could connect our .NET API to have a really nice full stack web application, but I mentioned hosting it in Azure Static Web Apps. So right now, everything is just local on my computer. We've been looking at doing the local debugging and everything. But to set it up in Azure Static Web Apps, there's only really a few steps that you need. So I already have my resource group ready to go here. Within the Azure portal, just search Static Web Apps, and we can create from here. And so what it'll do is it'll ask us for our details that we want. Gonna say East Asia is the closest to us, but it allows you to connect to your GitHub repo or your Azure DevOps, and it will remember your credentials from a previous time that you've worked with it as well, which is really nice. You can choose from any of the organizations that you're in, and it lets you choose the repository that you're working with, and even the branch. So if you wanted to create a static web app just for testing on one of your branches, you can do that as well. It doesn't have to be the final product ready to go. So it's really focused around that development cycle that you have. And then the build presets are based on the frameworks that it supports, and Blazor is one of them for our .NET, which is great. And I've changed the details for the application to be Jazz June. Jazz June is the name of our wine brand. Web.client. Web.api, but it'll give you the defaults. So if you haven't changed from the basic setup, then you're ready to go. So I'm just going to say review and create, and what this will actually do is it'll create first the GitHub action workflow file for us in our GitHub repo. So I have my repo here. There is no actions yet. There's no workflow file. But after this finishes running, there will be one there that'll automatically kick off and deploy our website to Azure Static Web Apps for us. So it's in progress. We'll see how long it takes. If it takes too long, I have a finished version I can jump to. But it's really good. It means that it's just a few steps, and it's focused on that development first experience. So if you decide, you can build your app and then decide which way to go. You can obviously use Azure App Services or other methods of hosting. But this is a nice, quick way to get everything up and running. And it makes up a random URL for you to use, but you can set up your custom domains for your site as well. So I think it would have created the file in our repo, potentially. Here we go. So it has the workflow file. It is there now. So you don't actually have to know much about how GitHub Actions works, because it sets it up for you. And it has the steps with the YAML file. Talk to Damien if you want to know more about GitHub Actions. So it's currently running. And once this is done, we will be able to select this link here and see that same website, which is connected to our database. Connected to our database and has everything working all together. So I'll show you another static web app deployment that I've already completed. So this one has the nice URL gentle sand, but looks exactly the same. It has, again, the cold start should really warm everything up before I do this, but it will have the wines coming soon. There you go. It has our 3 wines. So it's a really nice way to have your .NET apps in the cloud, full stack, getting up and running quite quickly. Great. So we, as a wine business, we have our website. We have all of our products up there. People are ordering it. We're doing really well. But now we want some way to help us manage our products as we're building them within the winery. Making sure that when we go into the winery, we like to take notes on things that we're doing to the wine and keep track of how it's going. And I usually don't have my laptop with me, so it'd be really nice to have some sort of mobile app to do this. And we can build a mobile app in .NET using .NET MAUI. So .NET MAUI is the .NET multi-platform app UI, and it's an evolution of Xamarin Forms. So it's a cross-platform native UI framework for building applications for macOS, iOS, Android, and Windows, all using .NET. And it makes it so you have one code base in one single project system for all of these different scenarios. So deploying to all these different devices with a native framework using .NET, which is really powerful. And it's generally available. So it became generally available at Build about a month ago. So it's out there ready for you to use and get started with. But how does .NET MAUI work? We're saying it's a native platform, right? But it's using .NET. So the way it works is everything starts with your application code. And this is what you're directly working with and what you eventually want to get out onto targeting your native devices. And what we've done, or what Microsoft has done, is on top of that, there is the specific SDKs or things for each area that we're deploying to. So you have your native Android, native iOS, macOS, and Windows. And on top of that, they have the .NET runtime. It is a little bit different depending on which bit you're targeting, but it's a unified .NET runtime across everything. And on top of that is the .NET base class libraries. So this is across all of .NET 6 and all the different scenarios. There's a unified base class libraries that everything compiles to and then goes into the different native areas, which is really nice. It means that we can use .NET across everything, and it takes care of compiling down into different native scenarios. And then on top of that, for being able to access the APIs for each one, there's the .NET for Android, .NET iOS, WinUI, and all of that. So if you've worked with Xamarin in the past, we said MAUI is an evolution of Xamarin Forms. So Xamarin Native, which had Xamarin.Android and Xamarin.iOS, that has become .NET for Android and .NET for iOS. But it has been re-architected and improved and all bundled up into the .NET ecosystem and using these .NET base class libraries. So on top of that, we have .NET MAUI. So this has all the layouts and UI controls and things that you need to make really powerful mobile and desktop applications. So all we need to be concerned about, because we don't really need to know what happens under the hood when we're using .NET MAUI, is our app code that's using .NET MAUI that then gets deployed out to all of our devices natively, which is really cool. So let's take a look at .NET MAUI. So I mentioned as a wine business, one of the things that is useful is when we go into the winery, being able to take notes on the things that we're doing. So a lot of times we'll go in and we currently have 6 different barrels, and we like to take notes on how the wine is tasting, maybe if we did some sampling and did some sugar analysis on it or whatnot, take some notes on that. So I've started with just a simple wine note app, and this is in .NET MAUI. I'm also using the latest preview version of Visual Studio, which has some nice things built into it for .NET MAUI, including this little notification thing up here, where it links you to building your first MAUI app, and has some tells you a bit about .NET MAUI, which is cool. But this is using XAML for the layouts, which is traditionally what's used with Xamarin Forms. We can also use just plain C# and Fluent UIs to build out your labels and your button and all that if you don't want to deal with XAML. The other thing that's nice within Visual Studio 2022 is this live preview. So I have it already running on my Android emulator here. But so I don't have to have the emulator up at all times. They have this live preview. And it goes both ways. So if I go in here and say Barrel 1, 2022, Chardonnay, Jazz June wines, wine looks great. I can then submit, and it mirrors it across both sides. So it makes it really nice for that local development experience. It also, you can do things like, I have the whole button layout and everything. You can do background, color, say it goes blue, and save it, and it automatically shows up here with that hot reload. So if you're doing any sort of UI changes, it's really quick to see those things happening in real time. So this app is pretty simple at the moment. You can just submit, and it kind of disappears into the ether. But I do have it hooked up with this command, so you can bind things to commands to do in your view model. So this is using the model view model way of working, so the MVVM. So in my view model, I'm just listening to that on submit and adding it to a collection of wine notes. So I could add in more pages where I can be able to go and look at all the different notes I've had, maybe do some advanced processing with all those notes. But it's all using .NET. It's the same tooling that we've been using with .NET. It's similar type of code handling and all of that. So your .NET skills are easily transferable from one area to another. If we want to advance even further, say there is something that I've set up on my website, maybe like an admin page where people can add in new products. Maybe I wanted that on my mobile app as well. I can achieve that with .NET MAUI and Blazor Hybrid. So what they've done is they've given us the ability to use those Blazor pages and the Blazor components within our .NET MAUI applications. And we talked about how there's the unified basic class libraries and everything underneath. So they've been able to leverage this and achieve it by putting Blazor on top of .NET MAUI to allow you to reuse your Blazor components within the mobile native Windows and macOS, iOS, Android experience. So it allows you to access those native app container and embedded controls. And all of this is generally available as well, which is really cool. So if you're, especially this is nice for people who are more focused on the web development side of things and maybe familiar with working with Blazor pages and doing that web development, you can apply all those skills to building these cross-platform native apps, which is really nice. So let's take a quick look at what that can look like. So for this one, all I've done is set up the demo or the Hello World template for the Blazor MAUI hybrid. But just in the Hello World template, it starts out giving you your base Razor pages, similar to what you would see if you start up a new Blazor project. We have our same, our HTML tags here and our code to increment the count. But we also have our XAML pages. So we have our XAML here, which is saying we're using the Blazor web view within our MAUI application. So it's combining the two together. So say I had, for example, that carousel component. If I wanted to share it across my website and my MAUI application, I can have it in a library that I share between the two. So you can reuse your components and only write that code once. So I'll show you what this looks like when it deploys onto my Android emulator. I could also use the desktop emulator for desktop apps as well, using WinUI. If I wanted to also, from my Windows machine, debug on an iOS device, I could actually connect directly to an iPhone and debug my app within my Windows computer. So it's going to load, and it always starts out with the default .NET splash screen. Takes a little bit to start thinking, which is why the hot reload is quite nice, because it does take a little bit to start up. But this is the Hello World template. If you've used Blazor before and seen what those Hello World templates look like, it's very, very similar. We have our counter. You can click, and you have your weather app here. So in my wine scenario, I can use this app to check what the weather forecast is to see if it's good for growing our grapes. But that's a really nice way that we can, keep using .NET across all of our different scenarios. And if you want to see an even more advanced example, there's an open source sample application called .NET Podcasts, where they've applied all these different ways of doing things. They have a nice MAUI application that is also using Blazor Hybrid with the Blazor app for web functions to listen together. But they've also connected up to some really good microservices that are hosted on Azure Container Apps. So there's been a few talks over the conference about Azure Container Apps. You can integrate those and use your .NET across all these different areas. So it's really powerful with what you can do. So we have our website. We have people ordering all these things. We have our mobile app and our hybrid application where we can manage things that we're doing within the winery. So next, we can advance even farther and get into .NET Internet of Things. When you're in the business of agriculture and things like wine, temperature is really important. So there's tons of use cases for how we can use Internet of Things to help make sure our business is successful. And .NET has libraries to support hundreds of different IoT devices. There's all kinds of open source and third-party tools to help you get started as well. And you can easily integrate with all of the Azure IoT services and any of the Azure services with the .NET SDKs as well. So you can use .NET to really power your IoT solutions, from that device integration and data processing to advanced scenarios with things like digital twins and end-user applications. So .NET has .NET IoT libraries, which is, again, an open source library that has for one thing, the system device.gpio, which is the package that implements various protocols for interacting with low-level hardware pins to control your devices. So when you're working with IoT, you have your hardware with the different inputs and outputs that you need to interact into and all the different sensors. And .NET has tried to set up these libraries to help with some of that abstraction and make it so you can focus on the development side of things and get down to creating applications for you. It's all cross-platform and can target different types of devices. They have built-in supports for some of the popular hardware pieces like Raspberry Pis and all of that. But if you want to get into different types of devices, there's also, within this repo, the IoT device bindings, which is a growing set of community-maintained device bindings for IoT components. So let's take a look at that community-supported repo. So it's not entirely a demo, it's more looking at what they have in the open source world. But this is within .NET/IoT, and this is the community set of device bindings. And these bindings are all wrapped on top of the system device.gpio to make it even easier for you to just focus on the application side of things and not have to worry about how the hardware connections and everything work under the hood. So there's a whole ton of lists here. It's all community supported, so if you get some new device and the one's not on here, you can add it yourself, which is good, and you can also see what's happening and how it all works. But they've even separated it into different categories for you, and there's a lot of really great examples. So I mentioned temperature is really important. I'm going to choose a Sense hat because I actually own one of these. So a Sense hat is hardware on top, so like a hat that you can use for a Raspberry Pi. And a Raspberry Pi is a powerful IoT device that's really good for projects at home or maybe making a robot arm with .NET. But yeah, so it works well with .NET. If they have all these examples here, I'll scroll down to the temperature-related one. So this is just the example on how you would get the information for the temperature and humidity sensors coming in from that IoT device. And it's using the same type of .NET that we're used to working with. We can use this within Visual Studio, do our debugging and analysis all from within our .NET applications. And if you wanted to continue down, getting into even more advanced scenarios, we can start to tie in all these different pieces together. This is an architecture solution idea from Microsoft, and this is for asset tracking. So let's say our business has boomed and we're transferring all of our wine and our grapes everywhere, but we want to track that the truck is going the right places, everything is temperature controlled, and everything is processed correctly along the way. So we set it up with all these different IoT devices that are sending data and telemetry in. We can connect that up to our Azure IoT Central, and we can have that maybe send notifications to our Azure Functions, which we saw we can use with .NET. We can stream in all the information to our end users through our MAUI and our Blazor applications, and we can connect to all of our different Azure services using the .NET SDKs as well. So we can get really advanced and really powerful with all the different things that we can do with .NET and IoT. And we can continue on past that. So we have all this data and telemetry coming in. Let's do something with it and make sure we get the advancements and the insights from our IoT. And we can do that with AI and ML. And of course, you can do this with .NET. It's the theme of the talk, right? So .NET has support for connecting into all of the different AI and machine learning tools within Azure. But in addition to that, there's also the ML.NET, which is a .NET-based machine learning framework. And just like everything else, it's open source, and it's cross-platform, and it's free for you to use. And it allows you to train, build, and ship custom machine learning models using .NET for a variety of ML scenarios. So you can, and it all works within Visual Studio once again as well. So you can continue to use your .NET skills to even branch out into machine learning. And then if you want to get into AI, you can do things like integrating into the Azure Cognitive Services, which have libraries for vision, speech, language, and decision. So say we have our own vineyard. We don't at the moment, but pretend we do. And we have a machine that goes through and does the harvesting. We can set up with our IoT devices and integrate with Azure Cognitive Services for the machine to decide which grapes are good and which ones are bad and do some automated sorting. So we can get quite advanced with what we can do with our Azure Cognitive Services and our .NET solutions. Cool, so everything is going well, our business is booming, and now it's time to just kind of relax and have a little bit of fun. And we can do that with game development. We can have some fun building games in .NET, using our .NET skills to keep going into the world of game development. With .NET, there is support for a whole bunch of different tooling and APIs and even ways to build your games in the cloud in Azure as well. There's support for a bunch of different game engines. The most popular one is Unity, but there's a whole bunch of others there where you can build games for your PC, for mobile, and even for all of your different consoles. And it really has the ability to keep going with using those tools that you're already familiar with and having fun working with .NET. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I have, this is Unity. So this is just the Unity tooling that they have. And it was pretty easy to set up. You can get a free license if you're just making personal games and stuff on the side. If you're making a game that you want to sell, you do have to start paying for it. But if you're just playing around, having fun, you can go ahead and get started doing that. And this is actually one of the getting started templates that they have for a 2D platformer. So I didn't write any of this code. This was already in the template set up ready for me to go. And it actually, this little guy runs across the screen. He can jump. I'm not very good at it, so he often dies, but he respawns, which is good. Yeah, he jumps up, he goes back and forth, all of that. So, and I can go in and customize what it looks like. If I had more time, I would have made it like a wine-related background somehow, but that's okay. We could just pretend. But yeah, so here we have all the game controls, and at the bottom here is all of our scripts. So if I double-click to open up one of these scripts, it actually opens up my Visual Studio, because this is all written in .NET. So once it loads, we can take a look at some of those scripts for our platformer game. I want to look maybe at the player controller. So the player controller is controlling how our little player moves around. It has, for example, this function to control the jump state, which is just a switch statement with some cases in there. And then it has some logic in here to compute the velocity and figure out, how high the guy's going to jump based on how you press the space bar. So maybe to help myself playing the game, I can tweak the logic a little bit to make it a bit easier to work with. But it's great. You're still using .NET, and you're building these games. It's quite powerful. You're using the tools that you're familiar with. It has those common base class libraries underneath, and everything is in .NET, which is really fun. So we've seen quite a bit today, and you might be wondering, how can you get started? Well, we mentioned there's tons and tons of online resources out there for you to use. The best place is really just going to the .NET website. There's links to all of the different scenarios that we talked about today. So even if you're a really advanced .NET developer in, say, the world of web, you can look at how you can apply those skills to maybe game development or IoT or AI or any of the other areas as well. Or even if you're just getting started, it's a great language for you to work with to be able to target all these different situations too. So .NET really is your platform for building all of your apps. You can target the web and build applications and services that are cross-platform and target all the different types of areas. You can build really powerful REST APIs and microservices that run and deploy on Docker containers. You can use .NET MAUI or Blazor Hybrid to target mobile and desktop scenarios that are native mobile apps and native Windows and Mac OS apps as well. You can integrate into all of the cloud services or host in a serverless environment in the cloud. Or you can get more advanced with adding vision algorithms and speech recognition with your AI and machine learning, and have some fun with your 2D and 3D games with game development, and get into making your own IoT applications with the .NET Internet of Things, and use .NET for everything. You can even apparently deploy your .NET MAUI apps to your Android watch. It's not technically supposed to be for that, but apparently it works. So .NET is for everything. So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for coming to my talk. If you scan the QR code on the screen or go to the bit.ly link, you can have access to all of my demos and my resources that I used here today, and my slides are up there as well. And if you're located here in Melbourne, keep your eye out for Jazz June wines in your local independent bottle shop. But yeah, thank you very much. And I think we have time for questions, if there are any. Yes?
For MAUI,
yeah.
when you're deploying a UI across every platform, does it tailor the UI to, like, does Android look Android-y and iPhone look iPhone-y, or is it kind of one standard UI?
It's one standard. There are some things that are specific to that platform. So in the .NET Podcast app example, they have a header bar, and on iOS it looks a specific way because iOS has more rules around how some of those things work. But then once you get into the actual application, it looks the same. So generally it's the same, but there would be little things here and there that are specific towards devices. Oh, and one thing I did forget to show, but when you create your either your MAUI or your Blazor hybrid application, there is a folder for for all your platforms. And there's within that a specific folder for Android, iOS, macOS, and Windows. So if you want specific things for the different platforms, you can still do that. But you can also have everything shared across, which is nice. Any other questions? Yeah.
What would you use to make a decision if you're going .NET MAUI versus the Blazor hybrid MAUI? Like, is there something that would determine you want to choose one versus the other?
I think it would come down to your skill set and your use cases as well. So if you think you'll want to target web scenarios as well, so if you want that flexibility to have it within a contained app as well as online, then go with the hybrid. And also, if your skill set is more towards that Blazor web development side of things, I would check out the hybrid version. But if you're just wanting to have it target the native application, definitely go MAUI, because it's first towards the native side of things. So yeah, that's my recommendation. How many people are using .NET 6 already? Yeah? Cool. Nice. Lots of people. That's good. Yeah?
Can we order your wine online? Legit?
Yeah. So I'm legit making wine. That's right now we currently only have a live Instagram. So that's our Instagram at the bottom, Jazz June Wines. So you can follow us. The website that I was building as the demo, I do eventually want to be our real website, but I haven't, like I said, nothing secure or anything like that. So I want to fix that up before I really bring it live to the world. I have purchased the domain, jazzjunewines.com. So that's what it will be. But if you go there now, there's nothing on it. But yeah, we're making a Yarra Valley 2022 Chardonnay. It's currently in oak on barrel. So yeah, coming end of this year. Any other questions? Yeah.
If you're like a lot of the sort of stuff and applications that are in various older versions of .NET, what's the upgrade path like to get into .NET 6?
Yeah, they have a bunch of tools out there to help you with the upgrade across. There have been a lot of changes with like C# 10 and some of the features where you have things like the global usings and all of that. But a lot of times you can still have all the namespace wrappings and have the usings in each file. So they set it up to be a bit backwards compatible in that way. But yeah, there's lots of tools that are available for you to use to help with those upgrades.